It's time for the Saturday morning cup of coffee with Paul the Waterman. Now, here's Paul.
Good morning. Welcome to Saturday Morning Coffee. I'm Paul the Waterman. How's everybody doing? How was your week? I hope everybody had a great, happy, safe week. I'm happy to be here with you. Today, I want to talk about several different municipal water treatment concerns. And I want to recap and go over the bioaccumulation, how contaminants build up in our bodies and our drinking water. This is something that we really need to think about, especially, if you live in town and you're in a municipal water supply, there's three things that you have to remember. One, your water is not being purified. Your water is being sanitized or disinfected. Two, a municipal water treatment plant cannot remove pharmaceuticals. That's something I want to be completely upfront about. A municipality cannot remove pharmaceuticals from the water supply. A municipality, the best that they can do is disinfect the water. So it's disinfected with a chlorine-chloramine mixture. Some communities use a chloramine, which is a chlorine-ammonia mixture. Some communities just use good old-fashioned chlorine. The problem with just chlorine by itself is chlorine is a gas and it dissipates, so it's going to disappear. Some communities have extremely high levels of chlorine content. I know communities where their chlorine levels can be over 4 parts per million, which is insanely high in my opinion. If you had a swimming pool, let's say you had a swimming pool, you get at the department store, it carries 5,000 gallons of water, holds 5,000 gallons of water. Your disinfectant range for it to be safe for the kids is anywhere between a 0.5 part per million and 1 part per million. So you can see if you have a municipal water supply that's, between 3 to 4 part per million, it's like bathing and drinking resort swimming pool water. Okay, so what is bioaccumulation? Bioaccumulation is the gradual buildup of chemicals or toxins in our water supply over time. This happens when the intake exceeds the rate of excretion. So what that means is that, if I've got a contaminant in our water supply, how long does it take before it gets dissolved or disappear? And the problem is majority of the contaminants that we have don't disappear. And they're not diluted. And that's something that they thought years ago when they were thinking about water contamination. Everybody thought, well, it's going to be diluted, so it's going to be so small, it really doesn't mean anything. But what have we learned? Forever chemicals. We've been talking about that lately. The forever chemical contamination started out, well, if you have 1 part per billion, that exceeded the EPA's recommended limits. But 1 part per billion was 1 drop into an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And then they get together, they have a couple webinars, and they discuss it. They decide, okay, it's now less than 4 part per trillion. So 4 part per trillion is less than that 1 drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. It's 4 part per trillion. Now the EPA says, okay, 0, you want no forever chemicals. So bioaccumulation in the human body is basically the same thing. It's where you get a gradual buildup of chemicals or toxins in an organism, which is us, and then and then the rate of intake exceeds the rate of getting rid of it or excretion or being metabolized. And so what happens is that everybody here in the world has PFAS in their body. Now, let's talk about pharmaceuticals and the bioaccumulation of pharmaceuticals. So when you take a medication, your body does its best to automatically get rid of it. That's where, if you take medication, your doctor may want you to, go get testing. They want to make sure your kidneys and liver are functioning properly based upon the medication that's being prescribed. So when your body takes that, your first thing it's going to do is it's going to treat it as a foreign substance and want to get rid of it. And so once that happens, that medication is metabolized, and then that goes into our water system. And I mentioned this earlier, where the EPA has a laundry list of unregulated contaminants. And unregulated contaminants are, again, contaminants in the water supply. The EPA knows about it, but the municipality does not test for them or report them. Thus, they are unregulated. So we have a concern that not only do we have forever chemicals in a bioaccumulation state in our body, we have pharmaceuticals in a bioaccumulation state in our body, because once we expel them, it's metabolized, it gets into our water supply, and they don't break down. You have medication that we're taking right now that is designed to last a very long time. And once you expel it and it's in the water supply, you absolutely can drink that again. And what I mean by drink that again, so water is reusable. Water comes into our home from a municipal water source. We expel that water out of our house, whether it's, through the shower, flushing the toilet, anything we send down the drain, okay? That goes back to the waste treatment plant. The waste treatment plant gets rid of the solids, and then it sends it right back out to the waterways where we draw it from again. Everybody is in a state of reusable water. Just be grateful that you're not in Castle Rock, Colorado. In Castle Rock, Colorado, 35% of all water that city it consumes is straight from the toilet to the tap. 35%. And eventually, because Douglas County is growing so fast, they're going to be at a greater level. I heard up to 70 to 75% of reusable water. A lot of the communities are talking about going to reusable water because it's something that is fast, it's easy, and it cuts down on resources and expenses to try to search for water, look for water routes, and pay. Think about water usage and water rights and how much a city has to pay for that. So a city could save water if you eliminate that expense, paying for water usage or water rights. So reusable water. When you do bioaccumulation, it not only affects us as humans, but it also affects the aquatic life. Aquatic life fish are known to have forever chemicals, pharmaceuticals. Do you realize that microplastics, we've talked about microplastics. Microplastics has tested positive on every major body of water here in Colorado. Microplastics are also at a bioaccumulation state. So as humans, we have the forever chemical contamination in our body. We have pharmaceuticals in our body, and we also have microplastics in our body. So that's something that we really need to be aware of. We really need to start thinking about the grand picture of our grand scale, the big picture. I guess that's a better word for it, isn't it? About the quality of our water and what we're consuming. And a municipality is just not designed to remove at a micro level. So nanofiltration. Nanofiltration is what is needed. So a point of use reverse osmosis, everybody should think about using at least a minimum of a point of use reverse osmosis, because it's the water that we drink with, the water that we cook with, is the most important part of our daily water consumption. You think about it, 99% of the water you use is for bathing, cleaning, and it's that 1% water we use for cooking and drinking, and it's that 1% that's the most important. So with a point of use reverse osmosis, you absolutely are ensuring that you're giving your family the best and safest, glass of water. Bioaccumulation substances are known to also have mercury, found in fish. You can also have dioxins, 1,4-dioxins is another concern. And then the other one is, lead and cadmium, heavy metals. And that can come from old plumbing and batteries and industrial waste. And, with all these landfills, think how big this area, our community, has grown in the last 30 years. Think how many different landfills, have come and gone and what we buried underground. Eventually, that's going to seep in to our water resources. The other thing I'm concerned about, speaking of seeping into our water resources, and I'll cover this down the road, what about all that nuclear waste? Nuclear waste was buried in metal barrels, and eventually those metal barrels will not last forever. And so what are we going to do when we have nuclear waste start seeping and getting into our aquifers? That's something to definitely consider and think about. How can you avoid bioaccumulation? First, for yourself, you want to avoid eating fish high in mercury, such as swordfish and mackerel. Choosing natural cleaning and personal care products without synthetic chemicals. So that's another one. The cleaning products that we use, do we think about this? So I mentioned 1,4-dioxin. 1,4-dioxin is not only an industrial solvent, but it's also on the EPA's unregulated contamination list, believe it or not. But it's also in shampoos and soaps and cleaning products that we use. So we have a contaminant that is unregulated, but yet they know it's dangerous, and they still allowed it to be used. Why is that? That should be a major red flag. We really need to start thinking about it, and you can find all this information I'm sharing with you. Just Google it, go on the web, type in 1,4-dioxin, and you'll see exactly the harmful effects, how long it's been used, and its continued use. But back to, so our cleaning products, do we stop and think, when we take the mop bucket and we dump it down the sink, do we stop and think that the cleaning products that we're using, are they, staying in our water supply? Absolutely they are. So let's take our first time out, and we come back. We're going to continue on this subject. Thank you. This is Saturday Morning Coffee with Paul the Waterman and AM 1310 KFKA. Welcome back to Saturday Morning Coffee. I'm Paul the Waterman. I'm glad you're here with us. So we were talking about bioaccumulated contaminants, and this is something that, we really need to think about, pay attention to. I mentioned, Denver water filtration, in safe drinking water. I pick on Denver water because Denver water is also have issues for giving their wastewater, the sludge from the waste treatment plant, and that's loaded with contaminants, that's loaded with PFAS, forever chemicals, and they're applying that on our farms, and so then helps get into our food chain. So that also can be a source of locally our bioaccumulation. When you have contaminants such as pharmaceuticals in our water supply, what can happen is that estrogen is something that absolutely in our water supply. We talked to a gentleman that engineers water reservoirs, and you guys have a water reservoir just west of you that's brand spanking new, costs billions of dollars to build, and you can't use the water because the uranium levels right now are so high, and they're hoping that the uranium levels will be diluted. But in the meantime, if you tested that water, it's going to show you that every major over-the-counter medication will test positive in that water supply. Every major over-the-counter medication is in our water supply. Acetaminophen, medication, byproducts for antidepressants. This is in our water supply. Now, antibiotics is another issue. Antibiotics, is in the water supply, and think how antibiotics get into our bioaccumulation state, because they, you have farms that give antibiotics to the meat and poultry that we eat, and so that also ends up in our water supply as well. So with antibiotics, could that be the cause why we have issues of superbacteria, superbugs, where they're becoming bacteria resistant? We also have issues all over being documented of flesh-eating bacteria that is antibiotic resistant. Is this because of the amount of pharmaceuticals that are in our drinking water? We have to ask this question. Pharmaceuticals in the drinking water, the EPA, and if we all went to the EPA's website and reported, hey, you should let us know exactly the amount of pharmaceuticals that are in our water supply and take them off the unregulated contamination list. So we know we have estrogen in the water supply. We know we have other hormones in the water supply. I'm personally concerned about puberty blockers and being in the water supply as well. So that's something that, we should think about. And when you look at an unregulated contamination list, and you could see, find that out, go to EPA.gov, and they'll share this information with you. You'll see, what I'm talking about and why, the concern should be there. when you're here in Greeley, do you guys ever stop and think, with the growth in the water resources that you guys draw from, how many other communities are using the same water resource? And so when you take the water from a municipality, right, and they draw the water out of ground or from a body of water, engineered reservoir, and that's used, where do you think the wastewater goes that comes from the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant? So every time you dispose of water, that has to go somewhere. So it goes into the waste treatment plant. The waste treatment plant takes out the biosolids, which is human waste, and then they send that water right back out to the same reservoirs that it draws from. That's why I said earlier, it's basically reusable water. When we go down this road and we're not looking at the chemical contamination and we don't consider the chemicals that we use for cleaning products, think about what kind of cleaning product are you using if you have hard water and soaps come under your shower door? You're basically using an acid to dissolve that. And when you use that cleaner, you're wearing rubber gloves, goggles, a face mask, and you're spraying all that down, and it's dissolving. It's an acid. It's dissolving that buildup rock and soap combination, because that's hard water. Hard water is called calcium carbonate. And as it oxidizes, it forms a scale or a rock, and so it traps that soap. So you're basically using an acid cleaner to dissolve that, and then what do? We rinse that down the drain, and that goes right into our wastewater. So if we want to protect our water resources, the first thing we should think about is a water softener. And why do I say that? Well, water softener eliminates the need for harmful cleaners such as acids to dissolve your hard water and soap scum. It also cuts back on cleaning products such as laundry soap, because laundry soap has 1,4-dioxin. And, do you realize with a water softener and a soft water system, you're going to use 98 to 99% less cleaning product? One of the demonstrations I do when we go to somebody's home and we do a water test, we take soft water and we ask for a washcloth. And we have this video on our website. If you go to waterpros.net, we have this video to show you. You take soft water, you rinse the washcloth, and you see all the trapped soap released. Hard water causes soap to curdle and stick. So that's why, that when you clean out the lint in your dryer, where do you think that comes from? The lint is your clothes, your fabric in your clothes breaking down and deteriorating. That's what makes lint. So hard water sticks on your clothes, and then you have to use basically a fabric softener. You either put that fabric softener into your dryer or use a fabric softener sheet, but you have to use a fabric softener so your clothes come out soft and smelling fresh. So that's all that process is because of hard water. And then hard water causes us to use more detergents and cleaners and fabric softeners that end up into our water supply. So if you do a water softener, and a water softener gives you soft water, and 99.99% of the time, you're using 98 to 99% less soap. And in some cases, soft water, you don't need any soap at all. If you just got natural soil, from grass stains to mud to dirt, soft water will dissolve that. There's a company out there that advertises carpet cleaning, and they use no soaps or chemicals to clean your carpet. What do you think they're using? They're using soft water. Soft water, if you want to do a test, we talked about doing the washcloth test. If you have a stain in your carpet, get bottled water, because 99% of bottled water we buy is soft water. Take that bottled water and pour it on that stain and see if that doesn't disappear. Soft water is a natural cleaner. Soft water allows us to use, less cleaning products. And so, I'm being repetitive, but I just want to, make sure we get this point out. With a water softener, you're really helping the environment. Why? Because your water environment, because you're using less harmful cleaners and chemicals and detergents that do not end up right back into our water resource or water supply. When we talk about the microplastics, I want to cover this real quick. Microplastics being present in our water, do you guys realize that every aspect of the human body, the organs, even in our brain tissue, they say has microplastics in it? Mentioned a while back a cardiologist named Dr. Grant Bailey. They tested cadavers and found that microplastics were all over the main arteries in the heart. And then on Father's Day weekend, I was watching Fox News, and they did a story. They say that we have enough plastic in our brain that would make up a plastic fork. These are microplastics. So microplastics, if they, are in our body supply, we know that they're tested positive in every major body of water here in Colorado. So when microplastics enter the body, they also can bring in chemicals, contaminations, carcinogens, bacteria. So that's another source. And they say that a bacteria could form, build up in a piece of plastic, and then it creates a film over the bacteria, which makes that bacteria antibiotic resistant. It's kind of funny on a side note, where bacteria, all they want to do is destroy. Where a virus basically wants to survive. So a virus will mutate and become less potent because it wants to live, where a bacteria doesn't care. Bacteria just basically is out there to just destroy. Let's take our next break. This is Saturday Morning Coffee with Paul the Waterman. You're listening to AM 1310 KFKA. Welcome back to Saturday Morning Coffee with Paul the Waterman. You're listening to us on 103.1 and 1310 AM KFKA. Glad to have you with us. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, we're talking about the forever chemicals, we're talking about microplastics, we're talking about bioaccumulation, how everything we're using is basically building up into our water supply. We talked about, water softening and how water softening can help prevent the contamination of our water supply by using less cleaning products. And so we talked about estrogen. And so estrogen is in our tap water. And estrogen is, multiple studies have confirmed that traces amounts of estrogen and other hormones can be found in your municipal tap water across the U.S. While the levels are typically low, they still pose questions about the cumulative exposure and the potential health effects over time. But how does estrogen get into the tap water? So let's talk about that real quick. So first of all, the most common source of estrogen in the water is naturally and synthetic estrogens excreted by humans. So any time that we basically use the restroom, we're putting those hormones back into our water supply. Estrogen is something that is also naturally produced by the body. Synthetic estrogen is that's taken in an oral contraceptive, hormone replacement therapy. And so these hormones are basically excreted, again, every time we, flush the toilet. Animal waste from agricultural, livestock operations using hormones to, produce growth and reproduction can also be a source. So anytime a farmer, goes out and fertilizes his field, gets rid of the animal waste with a manure spreader, that can be a source of the estrogen and hormones getting into our water supply. It's not. This is something that's very important. These kind of contamination are not removed by a waste treatment plant. A waste treatment plant is unable to remove pharmaceuticals from the water supply. So the question is estrogen in our water dangerous? And so while the EPA does not currently regulate hormones like estrogen in the drinking water, scientists have raised red flags. Too much of some hormones can, become endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors. An endocrine disruptor is a chemical that interferes with the body's endocrine system, which regulates hormones. These substances can mimic block or alter hormone signals leading to potential health issues like reproductive problems, developmental disease, thyroid dysfunction, and even certain cancers. Unfortunately, an endocrine disruptor can be found in many everyday products that we use. So this goes back to why it's important that we use a point-of-use reverse osmosis drinking water system. The point-of-use reverse osmosis drinking water system will remove pharmaceutical contamination. Why? It's because it's 0.001 micron. And then if you support the reverse osmosis drinking water system with a water softener, then those filters are allowed to focus mainly on your pharmaceutical contamination. One of the things that comes from the disinfection byproducts used in our water supply, so when they chlorinate, a disinfection byproduct that's also at a bioaccumulation state is trihalomethanes. And trihalomethanes are, let's call them THMs, are primarily found during the disinfection process when chlorine is added to the water. Chlorine reacts to natural organic matter, and such as decaying leaves and algae and plant material, and it produces the trihalomethane. Trihalomethanes are also can be found in well water. Well water doesn't typically undergo a chlorine disinfection. However, when well water is treated with chlorine or it mixes with surface water containing the organic material, trihalomethanes can regularly start testing in well water supply. So anytime you're out there and you want to hear people, I'm going to disinfect or shock my well, number one, you want to make sure that you're using the right amount of chlorine. But, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a fan of that because I think that can create bigger problems than, what you're designing to use it in the first place. But number two, you want to make sure that you rinse it, and after you do that, rinse your well properly. So trihalomethanes are carcinogen. The THMs is classified as is a human carcinogen. It also can damage, reproductive issues. There's been studies linked to high trihalomethane exposure, THMs, during pregnancy that can affect the infant's development in fetal development. Organ damage, liver, kidneys, and the central nervous system are particularly vulnerable, to prolonged high levels of trihalomethane exposure. A specific type of trihalomethane and their associated health risks. So trihalomethanes, because it's the most common, can also, it's a byproduct can be chloroform. And so chloroform is another, carcinogen concern. Chloroform is a human carcinogen. Long-term exposure may also increase the risk of bladder cancer and colorectal cancer. You can also, be concerned with liver and kidney damage. Chronic ingestion and inhaling these harmful byproducts, absolutely can harm your liver and kidneys over the long term, causing cellular damage, and also affects, your central nervous system. So the point I'm trying to make this morning is with everything that's in our water supply, I think we should really think that it's global. It's a bioaccumulation state. It's all over. And so these are contaminants. I always, say what contaminates the world contaminates us. And so, what we're doing to our planet, contaminating the waterways, our water resources, is going to, affect us because it's going to be in the water that we drink. It's going to be in the vegetables that we eat. It's going to be in the meat products that we consume. So it's a global issue. The only way that we can really treat it right now, because a municipality is not designed to purify your drinking water, it's impossible, solely based on the volume of water that it has to provide you. Because of the high flow rates that a municipal water supply has to send out to its customers, that in itself prevents water purification. So if you think about it, the only way to really ensure that you have healthy drinking water is do it yourself. This is something that, next year there's going to be major elections coming in this state, and I think we need to get our local politicians to start talking about this. Not so much as water resources, where we're going to get the water from, but more about where we're going to, how we're going to ensure the quality of water that's being provided to us. Talk about providing tax breaks and incentives for, solar panels and EV bicycles. I think we should think about, giving tax break and incentive. Everybody deserves to have safe, clean drinking water, don't you think? Everybody deserves to have that, best possible glass of water because, water is health. Water is everyday life. What do we use water for? So we know, right? Drinking, and water is a flushing agent that we clean out our body. It's also what we use to grow our crops. It's also what we do to, we use for our animals. It's in every aspect of life. So what we need is to think about, the quality of our water. And when we do a water filtration system, at least we're ensuring that the water that we use in our home is taken care of. But on a grand scale, the EPA really should open up the books and let us know what's truly in our water and eliminate the unregulated contamination list. That's something that I think, the EPA, when you hide chemical contamination, when you hide pharmaceutical contamination, what good does that do? How are we really serving the public? Do you think that cancer rates, especially colon rectal cancer rates in young adults today, could be caused by water contamination, some form of chemical contamination that ends up in our drinking water, ends up in our food chain, our food supply? That's something that we should really think about. I want us to start thinking about our water. Think about the water that we use every day and what possibly could be in the water. That's something that I want us all to think about. You're listening to Saturday Morning Coffee. I'm Paul the Waterman. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Saturday Morning Coffee. I'm Paul the Waterman. You're listening to us on AM 1310 KFKA, and I'm glad you're here with us. Thank you. So, with reverse osmosis water filtration, one of the things that you think about, because it's nanofiltration, there are operating parameters for a reverse osmosis system. Can reverse osmosis function properly in hard water? Absolutely it can. If your water hardness is less than 7 grains per gallon, then your reverse osmosis membrane can function at a high capacity for 2 years. But 7 grains per gallon is that magic number. If it's at 7 grains per gallon or more, then the calcium builds up on that membrane, causing that membrane to rip and tear. So then we find that at 7 grains per gallon of hardness or more, your reverse osmosis membrane filters will last about 12 months. And it's essential to think, if hard water contamination, if hard water buildup can affect the reverse osmosis membrane, you don't want to have a false sense of security. That's why it's important. And what we do at Water Pros is, we'll come out and test your water. After you have a system installed, we'll be more than happy to come out. We use what's called a total dissolved solid meter, a TDS meter, to measure the TDS rating from a reverse osmosis. A reverse osmosis will have a TDS reduction of about 95 to 99%. Now, this is going to be determined based upon how high of a TDS you have in the first place. So, here in Colorado, especially in Greeley and Alt, you can have areas where you have extreme high TDS, and it's not from hardness. It can be from sodium, high sodium content. So, a reverse osmosis is ideal on anything that's at the TDS reading of 500 or below. Once you get above the 500, then the reverse osmosis effectiveness is going to be reduced. So, you're going to go from a, 95 to 99% reduction. You're going to go to basically 90% reduction of 500. And then when you get higher, we have TDS readings that are 1,700 on the total dissolved solids. Now, that's, again, going to affect the operation. See, what a reverse osmosis does is that reverse osmosis, first of all, the membrane loves warm water. But we don't have warm water in Colorado, do we? No. Reverse osmosis is ideal because with warm water, the water flows freely through the membrane. Cold water causes the membrane to basically restrict. Like anything else, cold water causes things to shrivel, to shrink. So that affects the production rate. A reverse osmosis should be able to provide you, if you've got a 50 gallon a day reverse osmosis membrane or a 100 gallon a day reverse osmosis membrane, then you're going to get between 25 and 50 gallons of water per 24-hour timeline. Reverse osmosis holding tanks, standard holding tanks can be 2 gallons to 4 gallons, but you have to figure, based upon the incoming water quality, will affect the production rate of a reverse osmosis. It's ideal if you can feed a reverse osmosis soft water because then you're allowing the RO to focus on the chemical versus pharmaceutical contamination reduction. Now, sodium contamination is a different story. If you have high sodium, the reverse osmosis membrane will absolutely remove that, but the amount of sodium in your water is going to affect the production rate and the life of that membrane because remember what's happening. That sodium doesn't pass through the membrane, it gets trapped. So sodium, as it gets trapped, it's like filling up a vacuum cleaner in a sense. You think the RO membrane is like a vacuum cleaner bag that traps sodium. And eventually, the membrane is going to swell and it's going to get full and won't be able to produce water anymore. So that's why, based upon your total dissolved solid number, based upon the amount of sodium that's in your water, will also affect the lifespan of the reverse osmosis membrane. A water softener will not remove sodium from the water supply. In some cases, if you have high levels of sodium content, a water softener, even though you have hard water, a water softener, it's going to hard for that water softener to function properly. Because think about this. If I've got hard water with high sodium content, what is sodium used for in water softening? Sodium is used as a detergent. So high sodium level is basically like a saline solution to a water softener. So the sodium, if you have naturally high sodium in your water, the resin is going to think it's in a constant state of regeneration. It's going to be releasing the hardness ions in exchange of sodium. And so basically what happens is that the hard water passes through because of high sodium content. The resin won't grab it and hold on to it. And so when a water softener goes through a regeneration process, a cleaning cycle, the water softener bypasses itself. So the water that it's used in cleaning goes directly down the drain. So if you have a water softener that's on run mode with high levels of sodium in the water supply naturally, the hardness will just pass on through. So that's why it's important to get a water analysis and know exactly what you're doing. I always say water treatment is not plug and play or what you're dealing with. So with high levels of sodium content, a reverse osmosis absolutely can remove it, but it's going to affect the lifespan of the RO membrane based upon the amount of sodium that's in your water. When you have high TDS, the question is that, what about a water distiller? Water distillers, to me, can be effective, but think about this. A water distiller boils the water, takes it at a high temperature, and then that steam is then sent over to a separate chamber, and then it's cooled, and then the steam converts to water droplets, and that's where you get your clean water. But when you have high TDS, all that sodium is going to follow into that cooling part of the distiller, and it's still going to have high sodium content. So the only way to really remove that is through nanofiltration, point of use reverse osmosis. So in the last couple of minutes, let's recap, what we talked about today on Saturday Morning Coffee with Paul the Waterman here on FM 103.1 and AM 1310 KFKA. We talked about, start out the show about bioaccumulation. And bioaccumulation is basically every single contaminant issue that we have has accumulated all over our environment. And so we talked about, last week, we went over, issues with well water. And in our first show, I was really concerned about the PFAS contamination. We have a really good video on our, go to waterpros.net And we have a great video on our main page that talks about, the forever chemicals and how we got here. But, everything basically you have to understand is what's in our water supply is contaminating every aspect of our planet. It really is. And that's where, we have the bioaccumulation. That's where we have pharmaceutical contamination. It's in our fruits and vegetables. If you have the forever chemical contamination, that's absolutely in our fruits and vegetables. It's, in the water that we drink. You have the nanoplastic, the microplastics contamination, and that can carry other carcinogens with it into the human body. Is it safe to say that, the question, is our water safe to drink? And so I personally say no, because of all the contamination that we have. Why I say no is because the EPA and their laundry list of unregulated contaminants is giving us a false sense of security. Do you realize that your water provider is supposed to give you a report once a year? They mail it out to let you know, hey, this is the status of the water that we're providing you. But just like the Gen X chemical, if the EPA doesn't allow municipalities to test for certain contaminants, then that means they don't have to report them. So what that means is that we're getting a false sense of security about what's really in our water. And then with the disinfection byproducts, the chlorination that they use, one big carcinogen, and there's 3 others, but one big one, trihaldomethanes or THMs, that's a carcinogen, that's a cancer-causing agent, and that's absolutely in our water supply as well. So that's why I say, is our water safe to drink? No. But you can take care of that with a point of use reverse osmosis. Take responsibility for the quality of your drinking water in your home. It's something that can easily be done. Check out our website at waterpros.net. We've got a lot of great information there. And thank you very much for being with me. This is Saturday Morning Coffee. I'm Paul the Waterman. Keep it here on AM 1310 KFKA, and everybody have a great, blessed weekend.